Hi everyone and welcome to today's video on Eurorack sequencers. In this video, we'll be looking at the differences in workflow, features, and rhythmic results of a variety of Eurorack sequencers to help you find the sequencer that fits your need. Today's video focuses on the Nerdseq with videos on other sequencers to be released in the future. Here's a short sound preview of what you can expect from this video. There are tons of sequencers for Eurorack out there. The problem with buying a sequencer is, though, that just comparing a list of features cannot tell you the full story. It is much more important to figure out if the layout and the way of programming of a given sequencer fits your own musical mind and your compositional approach. As there's so much choice in sequencers, it is worth spending a bit more time to find the one that fits your needs and keeps you inspired. Today we have a look at XOR's Nerdseq, which has been a mainstay in Eurorack racks since 2017, with its take on tracker-based music programming. The main selling point of the module is its insane level of fine control over everything from the millisecond gap between gate triggers to full song structures. It is also known to be fairly complex. The Nerdseq has 6 programmable channels, each with 2 CV and 1 gate out, as well as 2 outputs that play internal samples. You can also buy a variety of expanders, such as a MIDI expander here or additional drum outs. The Nerdseq can do polyrhythms, polymeter, has a song mode, probability, and some generative features, and costs currently around 630 euros. You make sequences on the Nerdseq by creating patterns. Each pattern can have per step note, trigger, modulation CV, and effects values, and additionally can trigger patch and table settings. From left to right, notes is where you set your main note values. In the trigger column, you can set your trigger lengths and ratcheting features. The mod section is where you program what comes out of the mod output of each channel. Patches are basically presets that you can enable on a per step basis that can control a variety of parameters such as glide values and other things. A table is a mini sequence or arpeggio that you can trigger on a per step basis. The FX section has a ton of adjustable settings such as glide, trigger probabilities, or sequence jumps. As already mentioned, the Nerdseq supports MIDI out. You just have to convert one of your channels to a MIDI channel to enable the MIDI output. MIDI channels have much less features, and we will see how they differ with the upcoming examples. One last thing I want to talk about is the automate features that you can use per step or overall. If you press automate once, you get to the automate screen. If you press it again, you get to the envelope screen. Nerdseq has 4 different envelopes, and you can set the source and the destination for each envelope, as well as their attack, decay, sustain, and release. So here I'm going to trigger envelope 1 whenever gate 3 is triggered, which is triggering my baseline. And I am using it to change the CV or the pitch of the sound that is being triggered. Okay, let's turn it on and adjust the envelope settings. Next up, I want to briefly talk about the automate feature of the Nerdseq. So in the automate window, you can decide to have an automation source that globally affects a parameter on any of your 8 channels. So in this setup here, I'm using channel 3 to trigger my baseline, and I'm using an LFO to change the mod values. The mod output of the Nerdseq goes into the character input of the ultra kick, changing its overtone flavor. And if you want to be really crazy, you can set the LFO to some crazy high rate. So here the LFO is affecting the pitch of my ultra kick, and because of that I'm getting these crazy sounds. Additionally, you can also use the CV ins and map them to anything you like, and in this case here I'm using the tetrapad to again change the overtone characteristics of my bassline, as you can hear now. Alright, with this quick overview out of the way, let's have a listen to this first patch. Have a look at the overlays for more information on how each of these layers was programmed. What I have not yet talked about is the per step groove that you can apply to every step of a pattern. In a standard pattern, the Nerdseq subdivides each step into 6 subunits in its groove section, but you can change the amount of subunits per step. Higher values will mean that the step is slightly longer, and lower values will mean that the step will be slightly shorter. So what I've done in this patch here is I have 2 almost identical melodic lines, but one employs the maximum step length of about 35 units, where the other one only has 34. So if we play both melodic lines at the same time, we should start hearing some phasing fairly soon. In this patch, the Nerdseq is controlling the Bitbox Micro via MIDI, and the Bitbox Micro is set up as a multisampler with some harp sounds. So here's another full track example, and as before, the overlay will tell you more about each element. Pay special attention to the kraken that comes in as a percussive element later. On the kraken, I am using a lot of chants and ratcheting effects to give this whole patch a really unique tone, and I think this is something the Nerdseq really excels at. So I had the Nerdseq for a long time, and I also recorded some previous experiments before that I want to show you now. Pay special attention to the drums, as I'm using the Nerdseq mostly to control those, whereas I'm using other modules to sequence the melodic lines. Alright, the Nerdseq is probably one of the most feature-heavy sequencers you can possibly buy. You can not only define CV, gate, and modulation CV values per step, but you can change the probability of happening, add effects, Add probabilities to those effects, jump in sequences, have patterns start or stop other patterns, have ratchet triggers, add envelopes or LFOs, arpeggiate, use preset settings per step, play samples, oscillate, or self-patch. It's basically a full computer inside your rack. I particularly like the sequencer view where I can see which patterns are playing and where I can start and stop patterns at will to experiment with different song structures. I also enjoy the degree of fine-tuning you have, for example over probabilities or gate lengths. And I do have to mention that the Nerdseq is still getting updates regularly, with new features being added still. With all that power comes some shortcomings, however, because unlike a computer, you cannot use a mouse or a keyboard to program this thing. You still have to memorize quite a few button combos to efficiently navigate it. Nothing is really intuitive on the Nerdseq, and you will have to spend some time in the manual and time on the Nerdseq practicing, for example on how to create patterns, copy and paste patterns or sequences, or how to execute other not so obvious functions. I also find that beat patterns take slightly longer to input here than on other sequencers, because instead of having one button per step to enable or disable steps, you will have to navigate to the right position within your pattern using the cursor buttons first. I also don't think it's possible to humanize your patterns so that each beat may hit slightly early or slightly late, and making adjustments via the groove segment would take a lot of time if you want to do that for every single pattern in your song, which is why most of my Nerdseq patterns are strictly on the beat. Also, while I think the MIDI expander is amazing in enabling the Nerdseq to control a full studio of Eurorack and MIDI gear at the same time, it is a shame that the MIDI programming depth is nowhere near as deep as for the modular channels. So let's get the rating out there. The Nerdseq has a ton of different features that can be controlled with great detail. But the Nerdseq is anything but easy to use. Also, making patterns takes some time, so it's not very immediate. But it will make up for that with its versatility in what kind of patterns you can get out of it. What really stands out for me on the Nerdseq is its sequencer view. Here you can see all patterns that you've created and you can mix and match them to create bigger song structures on the fly. Overall, it's a great sequencer, but you need to spend the time to really learn and master it. Alright, that's it. As I already mentioned, I will be doing more videos on different Eurorack sequencers, so if anything is missing today, let me know in the comments and I'll add it to the next videos. Thanks so much for watching. Consider subscribing if you find this content helpful, and I will leave you with one last Nerdseq gem.